Rob, what about children and young people after something like an emergency or disaster?
Yes, I think that's very important because they're so easily overlooked, not only by the adults in the situation, but by the services around. And if people go into that tunnel focus of the adrenaline mode with so much to do, it's very easy for children to be a bit of a nuisance because they're distracting us for what seems to be so important. But the children of the future and the children of the family and young people, this is a very important time. We've got to remember that 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, whatever recovery takes, is really not that much time in a middle-aged adult's life. But for children, they'll go through 2 or 3 developmental stages. And if their development is not supported and they don't get the experiences they need to negotiate those stages, then their development's going to be affected. And there's now research to show this. So there are very simple things that I think we can do, and that is keep our mind on them. A simple piece of advice I give to parents is you can protect your family by simply giving your children your full attention regularly.
Very important.
Every week or every day, sit with them. Just don't have any plan. Just see what comes up. And create the communication patterns, particularly with teenagers. Create that expectation that you're going to check in with each other. You don't have to ask them to spill their guts and tell their most deepest feelings, but just have a bit of a chat about what you've been doing and
because the full attention, the chat or the conversations keeps the level of connection close, or the attunement, I guess, between a parent and their child in a good place. And I know, I just think about it now in my practice work over the years. I've spoken to lots of young people, older teenagers or young adults whose family went through a big event like a disaster, but their parents were so sort of caught up in everything that needed to be done as a part of recovery, and it just happened to the parents inadvertently. I don't think they ever wanted it to happen, but the kids felt to a certain extent forgotten or a bit neglected, or, as you're talking about, certain developmental stages are actually affected.
That's right. And it's very important to inquire into what the children thought was happening. I know of a family that I worked with where one of the parents was involved in a very traumatic event that went on for quite some hours. And this teenager, when she heard about it, left school and went home. Of course, the adults went to the school to get her, to support her. She wasn't there. No one knew where she was. No one thought that she'd gone home. So she spent a number of hours alone there, expecting her mother to die. And so she spent some time anticipating being without a parent, all by herself. And it was only when that came out that suddenly her disturbed behaviour made sense to everybody and things started to settle. So, it's difficult, but I think it's so important for parents to hold their role as parents. Another thing that's been shown by those of us who work with families, but also by research being done in the United States, is that one of the things that predicts the difficulties that children might have is the level of a negative emotional tone in the family, parents arguing, and the level of emotional distress in the parents. Now, it doesn't work to pretend everything's normal, but I think it's really important to hold those structures of privacy, that perhaps the parents will talk about their worries together after the kids have gone to sleep. That if parents are upset and angry and distressed, they say to the kids afterwards, "I'm sorry, it's a pretty tough time. Mum and I still love each other. I still love you. We'll get through this somehow. Let's do something nice on the weekend." To actively undo the problems that happen, and not to hesitate to apologise to children if you've lost your temper and done something unreasonable, because we can't expect parents to suddenly become saints. But But if we can all accept this is a tumultuous time and there's a point where we're actually together on this, that will hold everything in place.
So, yeah, some really, really important tips, I think, and suggestions. What is it that parents or carers should keep an eye out for and look for in children and young people? You know, that might be an indicator or tell them that something's not quite right or something's up.
Children and young people are very different from each other, but parents will know whether the behaviour is different from what it was before the event. And from the work I've done with families, you can't expect the child or young person to signal, this is about my trauma. That if they're just refusing to go to bed, then they're creating a big turmoil. They're not going to tell you that they're trying to avoid the nightmares.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very helpful that parents stop and think, this pattern is different from before the disaster. Therefore, I should assume it's got something to do with what they experienced.
So changes in behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's part of having a conversation. And just asking, you know, why is that? What do you want to do? And not being afraid to loosen up some of the standards and so on a temporary basis. Sometimes parents are very worried that their children might be putting one over them. But there's a very important principle that happens across the board of child and young people's development. It also happens with us as adults. It works like this. That if I've been through a terrible experience, I've got a lot of emotional stuff I'm trying to deal with, I need emotional energy to do that. That's got to come from somewhere. And where it's going to come from is the sense of responsibility and creativity and so on that I'm engaged in opening up the next stage of my development. It's challenging, it's difficult.
Makes sense.
And so what that's going to look like is I just can't really face this. I can't face going to school, secondary school. I just want to be back in grade 3 and I'll feel secure, but I can't. So I'm just going to jack up about going to school. And so, or I'm not going to do my homework, or I'm not going to do the washing up or make my bed or
go to bed or
go to bed.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at the pattern, they're behaving as if they were immature child of 3 or so years younger. And that's very annoying to stressed parents. You know, you're having it on. No, you've got to be responsible. You've got to pull your weight. No, but what we know is that this is a very predictable process, and it's in the service of the young person having the emotional capacity to deal with the highest priority, which is their own emotional state. If they can deal with that, they can begin to slowly do that. Now, we've got a term for that in child psychology. We call that regression. Regression means to go back to an earlier stage. And that's regression in the service of my own development.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's a very predictable pattern. So if your child is uncooperative, hard to get on with, being difficult, or even just being withdrawn, immature, sucking their thumb again, wanting lots of cuddles, not wanting to go out and play with the kids next door, but stay at home and sit around and just hang out with the parents while they're trying to make a budget or deal with insurance claim. They just want to hang out and be with you. Then just think that word regression. Have they let go of their current stage of development, gone back to an earlier stage where they feel safe and secure? What will happen is that as they deal with it, they will then, when they're ready, they will jump forward to where they need to be. And again, the American research has supported our own observations here in Victoria that when the emotions are right, they leap forward. If they were doing their development okay beforehand, have confidence, support them where they are.
Yeah.
Nourish them, nurture them, support them. Don't worry, they will actually take it up when they're ready. Yeah. And one of the things that they found in the US that predicts people having a poorer long-term outcome, young people having and children having a poorer long-term outcome, is when well-intentioned but misguided parents and teachers say, now, just because you've had your house burned down doesn't mean you don't do your homework, because you've got to do your VCE and your whole future depends on it. Otherwise, your whole life will go down the tube, and sort of trying to motivate them, and they can't do it. And if they can't do it, they can't do it. So this kind of pep talk just makes them feel terrible.
Yeah.
And I think for the first year or two, be aware of regressions. And another thing that's easy for young people to do is to derail their development by taking too much responsibility. I've heard recently about
we see that as well.
A disaster community that I visited earlier this year that had an event occur 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a rural area, and people were saying a number of the young people had decided not to go off to the city to university, but to stay on the farm. And so there's a risk there that if we don't keep supporting the normal developmental process with young children, that looks like playgroup, spend time with peers, exploring, riding their bikes, skateboards, then they actually become unable to move to the next stage.
I think, again, really, really good tips and suggestions there. So maybe just to summarise briefly, it sounds like for adults, they should keep an eye out for behaviour change. That can be a key indicator of something occurring for their child. Regression, as you spoke about, which will come through in behaviours. But adults shouldn't become overly concerned about that, I think, is part of what you're sort of putting across. But what they do need to do is talk to their children so they can understand what's happening and tune into the emotional state of their child so they can support them in that difficult experience. Because by and large, most of the time, if those things happen and are in place, the child at some point, or the young person, they're just going to come back to that prior level of development they were at before the big event anyway. But it sounds like what definitely can't happen again is just the avoidance and becoming over-focused on all other things recovery. Like, as we say, don't let recovery and the disruption take over your entire life.
It often happens that parents will say to themselves, I've never been through anything like this. I have no idea what to expect for my children. I'm very anxious. I don't want to get it wrong. And so they suddenly have this experience of losing confidence in their own basic parenting skills. Now, what I say to them, just keep doing what you were doing before. Adjust it, be more tolerant, be more flexible, understand a regression, but basically keep doing what you're doing, because that's what your children know. And that'll get you through. And then as time goes by, if you're really uncertain, that's when I think it's very helpful to see a professional. And often parents, if parents can see a child psychologist or a counsellor, they can often clarify their own mind, and maybe then the child can, or the young person can have some help, or maybe the parents just suddenly think, now I know what I'm dealing with. I'm happy to go with that.
Yeah, no, that's really clear as well. Thank you.